2 Samuel, chapter 1. Saul was dead, and David, returning after his victory over the Amalekites, had been at Ziklag for 2 days. On the 3rd day, a man arrived from Saul's camp with his clothes torn and earth on his head. When he came to David, he fell to the ground and prostrated himself. David asked him, "Where have you come from?" "I have escaped from the Israelite camp," he said. David said, "What has happened? Tell me." He replied, "The people fled from the battle, and many of them have fallen and are dead. Saul and his son Jonathan are dead too." Then David asked the young man who brought the news, "How do you know that Saul and his son Jonathan are dead?" The young man replied, "I happened to be on Mount Gilboa, and there was Saul, leaning on his spear, with the chariots and the cavalry bearing down on him. Glancing behind him and seeing me, he shouted to me. I replied, 'Here I am.' He said, 'Who are you?' I replied, 'I am an Amalekite.' He then said, 'Come here and kill me. My head is swimming, although I still have all my strength.' So I went over to him and killed him, because I knew that once he fell he could not survive. I then took the crown which he had on his head and the bracelet on his arm, and have brought them here to my lord." David then took hold of his clothes and tore them, and all the men with him did the same. They mourned and wept and fasted until the evening for Saul and his son Jonathan, for the people of Yahweh and for the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. David said to the young man who had brought the news, "Where are you from?" He replied, "I am the son of a resident foreigner, an Amalekite." David said, "How was it that you were not afraid to lift your hand to destroy Yahweh's anointed?" Then David called one of the young men. "Come here," he said, "strike him down." The man struck him and he died. David said, "Your blood be on your own head. You convicted yourself out of your own mouth by saying, 'I killed Yahweh's anointed.'" David sang the following lament over Saul and his son Jonathan. It is for teaching archery to the children of Judah. It is written in the book of the just, "Does the splendor of Israel lie dead on your heights? How did the heroes fall? Do not speak of it in Gath, nor broadcast it in the streets of Ashkelon. For fear the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, for fear the daughters of the uncircumcised gloat. You mountains of Gilboa, no dew, no rain fall on you. O treacherous fields where the hero's shield lies dishonored, not greased with oil, the shield of Saul, but with the blood of wounded men, the fat of warriors. The bow of Jonathan never turned back, the sword of Saul never came home unsated. Saul and Jonathan, beloved and handsome, were divided neither in life, nor in death. Swifter than eagles were they, stronger than lions. O daughters of Israel, weep for Saul who gave you scarlet and fine linen to wear, who pinned golden jewelry on your dresses. How did the heroes fall in the thick of the battle? Jonathan, by your dying I too am stricken. I am desolate for you, Jonathan my brother. Very dear you were to me, your love more wonderful to me than the love of a woman. How did the heroes fall and the weapons of war succumb? Second Samuel, chapter 2. After this David consulted Yahweh, asking, "Shall I go up to one of the towns of Judah?" Yahweh replied, "Go up." "Which one shall I go to?" David asked. "To Hebron," was the reply. So David went up, with his 2 wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail widow of Nabal of Carmel. In addition, David brought up the men who were with him, each with his family, and they settled in the towns of Hebron. The men of Judah came, and there they anointed David as king of the house of Judah. They told David that the people of Jabesh in Gilead had given Saul burial. So David sent messengers to the people of Jabesh in Gilead. "May you be blessed by Yahweh," he said, "for showing this faithful love to Saul your lord, and for burying him. And now may Yahweh show faithful love and constancy towards you. I too shall treat you well because you have done this. And now take courage and be men of valor. Saul your lord is dead, but the house of Judah has anointed me to be their king." Abner son of Ner, Saul's army commander, had taken Ishbaal son of Saul and brought him over to Mahanaim. He had made him king of Gilead, of the Ashrites, of Jezreel, of Ephraim, of Benjamin, and indeed of all Israel. Ishbaal son of Saul was 40 years old when he became king of Israel, and he reigned for 2 years. Only the house of Judah supported David. The length of David's reign over Judah in Hebron was 7 years and 6 months. Abner son of Ner, with the retainers of Ishbaal son of Saul, marched out from Mahanaim to Gibeon. Joab son of Zeruiah, with David's retainers, also took the field, encountering them at the pool of Gibeon. There they halted, one party on one side of the pool, and the other opposite. Abner then said to Joab, "Let the men come forward and fight it out between us." Joab replied, "Let them come forward." So they came forward and were numbered off, 12 from Benjamin for Ishbaal son of Saul, and 12 of David's retainers. Each caught his opponent by the head and drove his sword into his side, and thus they all fell together. Hence the place was called the Field of Sides. It is at Gibeon. That day a very fierce battle took place, and Abner and the men of Israel were beaten by David's retainers. The 3 sons of Zeruiah were there, Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. Now Asahel could run like a wild gazelle. Asahel chased Abner, not swerving to the right or left from pursuing him. Abner turned and said, "Asahel, is that you?" He replied, "It is." Abner said, "Turn to your right or your left. Catch one of the men and take his spoil." But Asahel would not break off the pursuit. Again Abner spoke to Asahel, "Stop following me, unless you want me to strike you to the ground. And then how could I look your brother Joab in the face?" But he refused to be diverted. So Abner struck him in the belly with the butt of his spear so that the shaft came out through his back, and he fell at his feet and died on the spot. On coming to the place where Asahel had fallen and died, everyone halted. Joab and Abishai took up the pursuit of Abner and at sunset reached the hill of Ammah, which is to the east of Giah on the road through the desert of Gibeon. The Benjaminites gathered in close formation behind Abner and halted on the top of a hill. Abner called out to Joab, "Is the sword to go on devouring forever? Surely you see that this can only end in bitterness? How long will it be before you order those people to stop pursuing their brothers?" Joab replied, "As Yahweh lives, if you had not spoken, these men would not have given up the pursuit of their brothers until morning." Joab then sounded the trumpet and all the troops halted. They pursued Israel no further and fought no more. All that night Abner and his men made their way through the Arabah. They crossed the Jordan and, marching throughout the morning, came to Mahanaim. Joab, having stopped pursuing Abner, mustered the whole contingent. David's retainers had lost 19 men in addition to Asahel, but had killed 360 of Benjamin, Abner's men. They took up Asahel and buried him in his father's tomb, which is at Bethlehem. Joab and his men then marched throughout the night, reaching Hebron at daybreak. Second Samuel, chapter 3. So the war dragged on between the house of Saul and the house of David, but David grew steadily stronger and the house of Saul steadily weaker. The sons born to David at Hebron were, his firstborn Amnon, by Ahinoam of Jezreel, his second Chileab, by Abigail widow of Nabal of Carmel, the third Absalom son of Maacah, daughter of Talmai king of Geshur, the fourth Adonijah son of Haggith, the fifth Shephatiah son of Abdul, the sixth Ithream, by David's wife, Eglah. These were born to David at Hebron. This is what took place during the war between the house of Saul and the house of David. Abner took complete control in the house of Saul. Now, there was a concubine of Saul's called Rizpah daughter of Aiah, and Abner took her. Ishbaal said to Abner, "Why have you slept with my father's concubine?" At these words of Ishbaal, Abner flew into a rage. "Am I a dog's head?" he shouted. "Here am I, full of faithful love towards the house of Saul your father, his brothers and his friends, not leaving you to the hands of David, and now you find fault with me over a woman. May God bring unnameable ills on Abner, and worse ones too, if I do not bring about what Yahweh has sworn to David, to take the sovereignty from the house of Saul, and establish David's throne over Israel as well as Judah, from Dan to Beersheba." Ishbaal dared not say a single word to Abner in reply, as he was afraid of him. Abner sent messengers on his own behalf to say to David, "And furthermore, come to an agreement with me, and I will give you my support to win all Israel over to you." "Very well," David said, "I will come to an agreement with you. I impose one condition, however. You will not be admitted to my presence unless you bring me Michal, Saul's daughter, when you come to see me." David then sent messengers to say to Ishbaal son of Saul, "Give me back my wife Michal, whom I acquired for 100 foreskins of the Philistines." So Ishbaal sent for her to be taken from her husband Paltiel son of Laish. Her husband set off with her and followed her, weeping as he went, as far as Bahurim. But Abner said to him, "Go back," and he went. Now Abner conferred with the elders of Israel. "For a long time now," he said, "you have wanted David as your king. Now you must take action, since Yahweh has said of David, 'By the hand of my servant David I shall deliver my people Israel from the clutches of the Philistines and all their enemies.'" Abner also spoke to the men of Benjamin, and then went to Hebron to tell David everything that had been agreed by Israel and the house of Benjamin. Abner, accompanied by 20 men, came to David at Hebron, and David held a feast for Abner and the men who were with him. Abner then said to David, "I must get up and go. I am going to rally all Israel to my lord the king, so that they will make an alliance with you, and you will reign over all that you desire." So David allowed Abner to go, and he went unmolested. David's retainers were just then coming back with Joab from a raid, bringing a great quantity of booty with them. Abner was no longer with David at Hebron, since David had allowed him to go, and he had gone unmolested. When Joab and the whole company with him had arrived, Joab was told, "Abner son of Ner has been to the king, and the king has allowed Abner to go away unmolested." Joab then went to the king and said, "What have you done? Abner comes to you and you let him go away, and now he has gone. Why? You know Abner son of Ner. He came to trick you, to discover your every move, to find out what you are doing." Joab left David's presence and sent messengers after Abner, and these, unknown to David, brought him back from the storage well at Sirah. When Abner reached Hebron, Joab took him aside in the town gate, as if to have a quiet word with him, and there struck him a mortal blow in the belly to avenge the blood of his brother Asahel. Afterwards, when David heard of this, he said, "I and my kingdom are forever innocent before Yahweh of the blood of Abner son of Ner. May it fall on the head of Joab and on all his family. May the house of Joab never be free of men afflicted with hemorrhage or a virulent skin disease, whose strength is in the distaff, who fall by the sword, who lack food." Joab and his brother Abishai had murdered Abner because he killed their brother Asahel at the battle of Gibeon. David then said to Joab and the whole company with him, "Tear your clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourn over Abner." And King David walked behind the bier. They buried Abner at Hebron, and the king wept aloud on his grave, and the people all wept too. The king made this lament over Abner: "Should Abner have died as a brute dies? Your hands were not tied, your feet not chained. You fell as a man falls at the hands of criminals." And all the people wept for him louder than ever. The people then all tried to persuade David to have some food while it was still daylight, but David swore this oath: "May God bring unnameable ills on me, and worse ills too, if I taste bread or anything whatever until the sun is down." All the people took note of this, and it pleased them. Indeed, everything the king did pleased the people. That day, all the people and all Israel understood that the king had had no part in the murder of Abner son of Ner. The king said to his retainers, "Do you not realize that a prince, a great man, has fallen in Israel today? I, though anointed king, am weak at present, and these men, the sons of Zeruiah, are too strong for me. May Yahweh repay the criminal as his crime deserves. 2 Samuel, chapter 4. When Saul's son heard that Abner had died at Hebron, his heart failed him, and all Israel was alarmed. Now, Saul's son had two freebooting chieftains. One was called Baanah, the other Rechab. They were the sons of Rimmon of Beeroth, and Benjaminites, for Beeroth is regarded as belonging to Benjamin. The people of Beeroth had taken refuge in Gittaim, where they have remained to this day as resident foreigners. Jonathan son of Saul had a son with crippled feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. His nurse picked him up and fled, but, as she hurried away, he fell and was lamed. His name was Meribel. The sons of Rimmon of Beeroth, Rechab and Baanah, set out. They came to Ishbaal's house at the hottest part of the day when he was taking his midday rest. The woman who kept the door had been cleaning wheat and had drowsed off to sleep. Rechab and his brother Baanah stole past her and entered the house, where he was lying on his bed in his bedroom. They struck him and killed him, then cut off his head and, taking the head with them, traveled all night by way of the Arabah. They brought Ishbaal's head to David at Hebron. Here, they said to the king, is the head of Ishbaal son of Saul, your enemy, who meant to take your life. Yahweh has avenged my lord the king today on Saul and on his offspring. But David answered Rechab and his brother Baanah, the sons of Rimmon, by saying, As Yahweh lives, who has rescued me from every danger, when someone told me, Saul is dead. Supposing himself to be bringing me good news, I seized and put him to death at Ziklag, and that was how I rewarded him for his news. How much more when bandits have killed an upright man in his house, and on his bed? Am I not to demand an account of his blood from you, and rid the earth of you? David then gave an order to the men, who put them to death, cut off their hands and feet, and hung them up beside the pool of Hebron. Ishbaal's head they took and buried in Abner's grave at Hebron. 2 Samuel, chapter 5. All the tribes of Israel then came to David at Hebron and said, Look, we are your own flesh and bone. In days past when Saul was our king, it was you who led Israel on its campaigns, and to you it was that Yahweh promised, You are to shepherd my people Israel and be leader of Israel. So all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a pact with them in Yahweh's presence at Hebron, and they anointed David as king of Israel. David was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 40 years. In Hebron he reigned over Judah for 7 years and 6 months. Then he reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel and Judah for 33 years. The king and his men then marched on Jerusalem, on the Jebusites living in the territory. These said to David, You will not get in here. The blind and the lame will hold you off. That is to say, David will never get in here. But David captured the citadel of Zion, that is, the city of David. That day, David said, Whoever gets up the tunnel and kills a Jebusite. As for the blind and the lame, David hated them with his whole being. Hence the saying, The blind and the lame may not enter the temple. David went to live in the citadel and called it the city of David. David then built a wall round it, from the Millo inwards. David grew stronger and stronger, and Yahweh, God of Sabaoth, was with him. Hiram king of Tyre sent envoys to David, with cedar wood, carpenters and stonecutters, who built David a palace. David then knew that Yahweh had confirmed him as king of Israel and, for the sake of his people Israel, had extended his sovereignty. After coming from Hebron, David took other concubines and wives in Jerusalem, and sons and daughters were born to him. These are the names of those born to him in Jerusalem: Shammua, Shobab, Nathan, Solomon, Ibhar, Elishua, Nepheg, Japhia, Elishama, Eliada, Eliphalet. When the Philistines heard that David had been anointed as king of Israel, they all went up to seek him out. On hearing this, David went down to the stronghold. When the Philistines arrived, they deployed in the valley of the Rephaim. David consulted Yahweh and asked, "Shall I attack the Philistines? Will you deliver them into my power?" Yahweh replied to David, "Attack. I shall certainly deliver the Philistines into your power." Accordingly, David went to Baal-perazim, and there David defeated them. He said, "Yahweh has made a breach in my enemies for me, as though they had been breached by a flood." This is why the place was given the name Baal-perazim. They had left their gods behind them there, and David and his men carried them off. Again the Philistines invaded and deployed in the valley of the Rephaim. David consulted Yahweh, who replied, "Do not attack them from the front. Go round to their rear and engage them opposite the balsam trees. When you hear the sound of footsteps in the tops of the balsam trees, advance, for that will be Yahweh going out ahead of you to defeat the Philistine army." David did as Yahweh had ordered and beat the Philistines from Gibeon to the pass of Gezer. 2 Samuel, chapter 6. David again mustered all the picked troops of Israel, 30,000 men. Setting off with the whole force then with him, David went to Bala of Judah, from there to bring up the ark of God, who bears the title Yahweh Sabaoth, enthroned on the winged creatures. They transported the ark of God on a new cart and brought it out of Abinadab's house which is on the hill. Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, drove the cart. Uzzah walked alongside the ark of God, and Ahio went in front. David and the whole house of Israel danced before Yahweh with all their might, singing to the accompaniment of harps, lyres, tambourines, sistrums, and cymbals. When they came to Nachon's threshing floor, Uzzah reached his hand out to the ark of God and steadied it, as the oxen were making it tilt. This roused Yahweh's anger against Uzzah, and for this crime God struck him down on the spot, and there he died beside the ark of God. David resented Yahweh's having broken out against Uzzah, and the place was given the name Perez-Uzzah, which it still has today. That day David felt afraid of Yahweh. "How can the ark of Yahweh come to be with me?" he said. So David decided not to take the ark of Yahweh with him into the city of David, but diverted it to the house of Obed-Edom of Gath. The ark of Yahweh remained in the house of Obed-Edom of Gath for 3 months, and Yahweh blessed Obed-Edom and his whole family. King David was informed that Yahweh had blessed Obed-Edom's family and everything belonging to him on account of the ark of God. David accordingly went and, amid great rejoicing, brought the ark of God up from Obed-Edom's house to the city of David. When the bearers of the ark of Yahweh had gone 6 paces, he sacrificed an ox and a fat sheep. And David danced whirling round before Yahweh with all his might, wearing a linen loincloth. Thus with war cries and blasts on the horn, David and the entire house of Israel brought up the ark of Yahweh. Now as the ark of Yahweh entered the city of David, Michal daughter of Saul was watching from the window, and when she saw King David leaping and whirling round before Yahweh, the sight of him filled her with contempt. They brought the ark of Yahweh in and put it in position, inside the tent which David had erected for it. And David presented burnt offerings and communion sacrifices in Yahweh's presence. And when David had finished presenting burnt offerings, he blessed the people in the name of Yahweh Sabaoth. To all the people, to the whole multitude of Israelites, men and women, he then distributed to each a loaf of bread, a portion of dates and a raisin cake. Then the people all went back to their homes. As David was coming back to bless his household, Michal daughter of Saul came out to meet him. "Much honor the king of Israel has won today," she said, making an exhibition of himself under the eyes of his servant maids, making an exhibition of himself like a buffoon. David replied to Michal, "I was dancing for Yahweh, not for them. As Yahweh lives, who chose me in preference to your father and his whole family to make me leader of Israel, Yahweh's people, I shall dance before Yahweh and lower myself even further than that. In your eyes I may be base, but by the maids you speak of, by them, I shall be held in honor." And to the day of her death, Michal, daughter of Saul, had no children. 2 Samuel, chapter 7. Once the king had settled into his palace and Yahweh had granted him rest from all the enemies surrounding him, the king said to the prophet Nathan, "Look, I am living in a cedar wood palace, while the ark of God is under awnings." Nathan said to the king, "Go and do whatever you have in mind, for Yahweh is with you." But that very night, the word of Yahweh came to Nathan. "Go and tell my servant David, Yahweh says this, are you to build me a temple for me to live in? I have never lived in a house from the day when I brought the Israelites out of Egypt until today, but have kept traveling with a tent for shelter. In all my travels with all the Israelites, did I say to any of the judges of Israel, whom I had commanded to shepherd my people Israel, why do you not build me a cedar wood temple? This is what you must say to my servant David, Yahweh Sabaoth says this, I took you from the pasture, from following the sheep, to be leader of my people Israel. I have been with you wherever you went. I have got rid of all your enemies for you. I am going to make your fame as great as the fame of the greatest on earth. I am going to provide a place for my people Israel. I shall plant them there, and there they will live and never be disturbed again. Nor will they be oppressed by the wicked any more, as they were in former times ever since the time when I instituted judges to govern my people Israel, and I shall grant you rest from all your enemies. Yahweh furthermore tells you that he will make you a dynasty. And when your days are over and you fall asleep with your ancestors, I shall appoint your heir, your own son, to succeed you, and I shall make his sovereignty secure. He will build a temple for my name, and I shall make his royal throne secure forever. I shall be a father to him and he a son to me. If he does wrong, I shall punish him with a rod such as men use, with blows such as mankind gives. But my faithful love will never be withdrawn from him as I withdrew it from Saul, whom I removed from before you. Your dynasty and your sovereignty will ever stand firm before me, and your throne be forever secure." Nathan related all these words and this whole revelation to David. King David then went in, sat down in Yahweh's presence and said, "Who am I, Lord Yahweh, and what is my lineage, for you to have led me as far as this? Yet to you, Lord Yahweh, this seemed too little, and now you extend your promises for your servant's family into the distant future. Such is human destiny, Lord Yahweh. What more can David say to you, since you, Lord Yahweh, know all about your servant? Because of your promise, and since you were so inclined, you have had the generosity to reveal this to your servant. That is why you are great, Lord Yahweh. There is no one like you, no God but you alone, as everything that we have heard confirms. Is there another people on earth like your people, like Israel, whom a God proceeded to redeem, to make them his people and to make a name for himself by performing great and terrible things on their behalf, by driving out nations and their gods before his people? For you constituted your people Israel your own people forever, and you, Yahweh, became their God. Now, Yahweh God, may the promise which you have made for your servant and for his family stand firm forever as you have said, so that your name will be exalted forever and people will say, Israel's God is Yahweh Sabaoth. Your servant David's dynasty will be secure before you, since you, Yahweh Sabaoth, the God of Israel, have disclosed to your servant, I am going to build you a dynasty. Hence, your servant has ventured to offer this prayer to you. Yes, Lord Yahweh, you are God indeed. Your words are true, and you have made this generous promise to your servant. What is more, you have deigned to bless your servant's dynasty, so that it may remain forever before you. For you, Lord Yahweh, have spoken, and may your servant's dynasty be blessed with your blessing forever. 2 Samuel, chapter 8. After this, David defeated the Philistines and subdued them. From the grip of the Philistines he rested. He also defeated the Moabites and, making them lie on the ground, measured them off by the line. He measured out 2 lines to be put to death and 1 full line to have their lives spared. The Moabites became David's subjects and paid him tribute. David defeated Hadadezer son of Rehob, king of Zobah, when the latter mounted an expedition to extend his power over the river. David captured 1,700 charioteers and 20,000 foot soldiers from him. David hamstrung all the chariot teams, keeping only 100 of them. The Arameans of Damascus came to the help of Hadadezer king of Zobah, but David killed 22,000 of the Arameans. David then imposed governors on Aram of Damascus, and the Arameans became David's subjects and paid him tribute. Wherever David went, Yahweh gave him victory. David took the golden shields carried by Hadadezer's guards and brought them to Jerusalem. From Beta and Berothai, towns belonging to Hadadezer, King David captured a great quantity of bronze. When king of Hamath heard that David had defeated Hadadezer's entire army, he sent his son Hadaram to King David to greet him and to congratulate him on having made war on Hadadezer and on having defeated him. Since Hadadezer was at war with Hadaram brought with him objects made of silver, gold and bronze, which King David also consecrated to Yahweh, as he had already consecrated the silver and gold taken from all the nations which he had subjugated from Aram, Moab, the Ammonites, the Philistines and Amalek, and from the spoil of Hadadezer son of Rehob, king of Zobah. David became famous when he came home from defeating the Edomites in the Valley of Salt, 18,000 of them. He imposed governors on Edom, and all the Edomites became David's subjects. Wherever David went, Yahweh gave him victory. David ruled over all Israel, administering law and justice to all his people. Joab son of Zeruiah was in command of the army. Jehoshaphat son of Ahilud was herald. Zadok and Abiathar son of Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, were priests. Sariah was secretary. Benaiah son of Jehoiada was in command of the Cherethites and Pelethites. David's sons were priests. Second Samuel, chapter 9. David asked, "Is there anyone belonging to Saul's family left, to whom I might show faithful love for Jonathan's sake?" Now Saul's family had a servant whose name was Ziba. When he had been summoned to David, the king said, "Are you Ziba?" "At your service," he replied. The king said, "Is there no one left belonging to Saul's family, for me to treat with God's own faithful love?" Ziba said to the king, "There is still one of Jonathan's sons. He has crippled feet." The king asked, "Where is he?" Ziba replied, "He is living in the household of Machir son of Ammiel, at Lo-debar." So King David sent for him to be fetched from the house of Machir son of Ammiel at Lo-debar. On entering David's presence, Meribel son of Jonathan, son of Saul, fell on his face and prostrated himself. David said, "Meribel." He replied, "Here I am at your service." David then said, "Do not be afraid. I will indeed treat you with faithful love for your father Jonathan's sake. I shall restore all your grandfather Saul's estates to you, and you will always eat at my table." Meribel prostrated himself and said, "Who is your servant, for you to show favor to a dead dog like me?" The king then summoned Saul's servant Ziba and said, "Everything belonging to Saul and his family, I give to your master's son. You must work the land for him, you and your sons and your slaves. You must harvest the produce to provide food for your master's family to eat. But Meribel, your master's son, will always take his own meals at my table." Now, Ziba had 15 sons and 20 slaves. Ziba said to the king, "Your servant will do everything my lord the king has ordered his servant." So Meribel ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. Meribel had a young son whose name was Micah. All the people living in Ziba's household entered Meribel's service. Meribel lived in Jerusalem, since he always ate at the king's table. He was crippled in both feet. Second Samuel, chapter 10. After this, when the king of the Ammonites died and his son Hanun succeeded him, David thought, "I shall show Hanun son of Nahash the same faithful love as his father showed me." And David sent his representatives to offer him condolences over his father. But when David's representatives reached the Ammonites' country, the Ammonite princes said to Hanun their master, Do you really think David means to honor your father when he sends you messengers with sympathy? On the contrary, the reason why David has sent his representatives to you is to explore the city, to reconnoiter and so overthrow it." Whereupon Hanan seized David's representatives, shaved off half their beards, cut their clothes off halfway up, at their buttocks, and sent them away. When David was told, he sent someone to meet them, since the men were overcome with shame. "Stay in Jericho," the king said, "until your beards have grown again, and come back then." When the Ammonites realized that they had antagonized David, they sent agents to hire 20,000 foot soldiers from the Arameans of Beth-rehob and the Arameans of Zobah, 1,000 men from the king of Makkah and 12,000 men from the prince of Tob. When David heard this, he sent Joab with the whole army, the champions. The Ammonites marched out and drew up their line of battle at the city gate, while the Arameans of Zobah and of Rehob and the men of Tob and Makkah kept their distance in the open country. Joab, seeing that he had to fight on two fronts, to his front and to his rear, chose the best of Israel's picked men and drew them up in line facing the Arameans. He entrusted the rest of the army to his brother Abishai, and drew them up in line facing the Ammonites. "If the Arameans prove too strong for me," he said, "you must come to my help. If the Ammonites prove too strong for you, I shall come to yours. Be brave. Let us acquit ourselves like men for the sake of our people and for the cities of our God. And let Yahweh do as he thinks right." Joab and the force with him joined battle with the Arameans, who fled at his onslaught. When the Ammonites saw that the Arameans had fled, they too fled from Abishai and withdrew into the city. Hence, Joab broke off his campaign against the Ammonites and returned to Jerusalem. The Arameans, realizing that Israel had got the better of them, concentrated their forces. Hadadezer sent messengers and mobilized the Arameans living on the other side of the river, and these arrived at Helam, with Shobach the commander of Hadadezer's army at their head. David, being informed of this, mustered all Israel, crossed the Jordan and arrived at Helam. The Arameans drew up in line facing David and engaged him. But the Arameans fled from Israel, and David killed 700 of their chariot teams and 40,000 men. He also cut down Shobach the commander of their army, who died there. When all Hadadezer's vassal kings saw that Israel had got the better of them, they made peace with the Israelites and became their subjects. The Arameans were afraid to give any more help to the Ammonites. 2 Samuel, chapter 11. At the turn of the year, at the time when kings go campaigning, David sent Joab and with him his guards and all Israel. They massacred the Ammonites and laid siege to Rabbah of the Ammonites. David, however, remained in Jerusalem. It happened towards evening, when David had got up from resting and was strolling on the palace roof, that from the roof he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. David made inquiries about this woman and was told, "Why, that is Bathsheba daughter of Eliam and wife of Uriah the Hittite." David then sent messengers to fetch her. She came to him, and he lay with her, just after she had purified herself from her period. She then went home again. The woman conceived and sent word to David, "I am pregnant." David then sent word to Joab, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." Whereupon Joab sent Uriah to David. When Uriah reached him, David asked how Joab was and how the army was and how the war was going. David then said to Uriah, "Go down to your house and wash your feet." Uriah left the palace and was followed by a present from the king's table. Uriah, however, slept at the palace gate with all his master's bodyguard and did not go down to his house. This was reported to David. "Uriah," they said, "has not gone down to his house." So David asked Uriah, "Haven't you just arrived from the journey? Why didn't you go down to your house?" To which Uriah replied, "The ark, Israel and Judah are lodged in huts. My master Joab and my lord's guards are camping in the open. Am I to go to my house, then, and eat and drink and sleep with my wife? As Yahweh lives, and as you yourself live, I shall so no such thing." David then said to Uriah, "Stay on here today. Tomorrow I shall send you off." So Uriah stayed that day in Jerusalem. The next day, David invited him to eat and drink in his presence and made him drunk. In the evening, Uriah went out and bedded down with his master's bodyguard, but did not go down to his house. Next morning David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by Uriah. In the letter he wrote, "Put Uriah out in front where the fighting is fiercest and then fall back, so that he gets wounded and killed." Joab, then besieging the city, stationed Uriah at a point where he knew that there would be tough fighters. The people of the city sallied out and engaged Joab. There were casualties in the army, among David's guards, and Uriah the Hittite was killed as well. Joab sent David a full account of the battle. To the messenger he gave this order: "When you have finished telling the king all about the battle, if the king's anger is aroused and he says, 'Why did you go near the town to give battle? Didn't you know that they would shoot from the ramparts? Who killed Abimelech's son of Jerubbaal? Wasn't it a woman who dropped a millstone on him from the ramparts, causing his death at Thebez? Why did you go near the ramparts?' You are to say, 'Your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead too.'" So the messenger set off and, on his arrival, told David everything that Joab had instructed him to say. David flew into a rage with Joab and said to the messenger, "Why did you go near the ramparts? Who killed Abimelech's son of Jerubbaal? Wasn't it a woman who dropped a millstone on him from the ramparts, causing his death at Thebez? Why did you go near the ramparts?" The messenger replied to David, "Their men had won an initial advantage and then came out to engage us in the open. We then drove them back into the gateway, but the archers shot at your retainers from the ramparts. Some of the king's retainers lost their lives, and your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead too." David then said to the messenger, "Say this to Joab, 'Do not take the matter to heart. The sword devours now one and now another. Attack the town in greater force and destroy it. That will encourage him." When Uriah's wife heard that her husband Uriah was dead, she mourned for her husband. When the period of mourning was over, David sent to have her brought to his house. She became his wife and bore him a son. But what David had done displeased Yahweh. 2 Samuel, chapter 12. Yahweh sent the prophet Nathan to David. He came to him and said, "In the same town were two men, one rich, the other poor. The rich man had flocks and herds in great abundance. The poor man had nothing but a ewe lamb, only a single little one which he had bought. He fostered it, and it grew up with him and his children, eating his bread, drinking from his cup, sleeping in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. When a traveler came to stay, the rich man would not take anything from his own flock or herd to provide for the wayfarer who had come to him. Instead, he stole the poor man's lamb and prepared that for his guest. David flew into a great rage with the man. 'As Yahweh lives,' he said to Nathan, 'the man who did this deserves to die. For doing such a thing and for having shown no pity, he shall make fourfold restitution for the lamb.' Nathan then said to David, 'You are the man. Yahweh, God of Israel, says this, I anointed you king of Israel. I saved you from Saul's clutches. I gave you your master's household and your master's wives into your arms. I gave you the house of Israel and the house of Judah. And if this is still too little, I shall give you other things as well. Why did you show contempt for Yahweh, by doing what displeases him? You put Uriah the Hittite to the sword. You took his wife to be your wife, causing his death by the sword of the Ammonites. For this, your household will never be free of the sword, since you showed contempt for me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to make her your wife. Yahweh says this, out of your own household I shall raise misfortune for you. Before your very eyes I shall take your wives and give them to your neighbor, who will lie with your wives in broad daylight. You have worked in secret, but I shall work this for all Israel to see, in broad daylight. David said to Nathan, I have sinned against Yahweh. Nathan then said to David, Yahweh, for his part, forgives your sin. You are not to die. But since you have outraged Yahweh by doing this, the child born to you will die." And Nathan went home. Yahweh struck the child which Uriah's wife had borne to David, and it fell gravely ill. David pleaded with Yahweh for the child. He kept a strict fast and went home and spent the night lying on the ground, covered with sacking. The officials of his household stood round him, intending to get him off the ground, but he refused, nor would he take food with them. On the 7th day the child died. David's retinue were afraid to tell him that the child was dead. Even when the child was alive, they thought, "We reasoned with him and he would not listen to us. How can we tell him that the child is dead? He will do something desperate." David, however, noticed that his retinue were whispering among themselves, and realized that the child was dead. "Is the child dead?" he asked the officers. They replied, "He is dead." David got off the ground, bathed and anointed himself and put on fresh clothes. Then he went into Yahweh's sanctuary and prostrated himself. On returning to his house, he asked to be served with food and ate it. His retinue said, "Why are you acting like this? When the child was alive, you fasted and wept. Now that the child is dead, you get up and take food." "When the child was alive," he replied, "I fasted and wept because I kept thinking, 'Who knows? Perhaps Yahweh will take pity on me and the child will live.' But now that he is dead, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he cannot come back to me." David consoled his wife Bathsheba. He went to her and slept with her. She conceived and gave birth to a son, whom she called Solomon. Yahweh loved him and made this known by means of the prophet Nathan, who named him Jedediah, as Yahweh had instructed. Joab assaulted Rabbah of the Ammonites and captured the royal town. He then sent messengers to tell David, "I have assaulted Rabbah and captured the water supply. So now muster the rest of the army, lay siege to the town and take it, or I will take it and the town will be called after me." So David mustered the whole army and marched on Rabbah. He assaulted the town and captured it. He took the crown off Milcom's head. It weighed 1 talent of gold, and in it was set a precious stone which went on David's head instead. He carried off great quantities of booty from the town, and he expelled its inhabitants, setting them to work with saws, iron picks and iron axes, employing them at brickmaking. He treated all the Ammonite towns in the same way. David and the whole army returned to Jerusalem. 2 Samuel, chapter 13. After this, the following events took place. Absalom son of David had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar. Amnon son of David fell in love with her. Amnon was so obsessed with his sister Tamar that it made him ill, since she was a virgin, and Amnon thought it impossible to do anything to her. But Amnon had a friend called Jonadab son of Shimeah, David's brother, and Jonadab was a very shrewd man. "Son of the king," he said, "tell me why, morning after morning, you look so worn? Won't you tell me?" Amnon replied, "I am in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." Then Jonadab said, "Take to your bed, pretend to be ill, and, when your father comes to visit you, say, 'Please let my sister Tamar come and give me something to eat. Let her prepare the food where I can see. What she gives me I shall eat.'" So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. The king then came to visit him, and Amnon said to the king, "Please let my sister Tamar come and make a cake or two where I can watch. What she gives me I shall eat." David then sent word to Tamar at the palace, "Go to your brother Amnon's house and prepare some food for him." Tamar went to the house of her brother Amnon, who was lying there in bed. She took dough and kneaded it, and she made some cakes while he watched, and baked the cakes. She then took the pan and dished them up in front of him, but he refused to eat. Amnon said, "Let everyone leave me." So everyone withdrew. Amnon then said to Tamar, "Bring the food to the inner room, so that I can eat what you give me." So Tamar took the cakes which she had made and brought them to her brother Amnon in the inner room. And as she was offering the food to him, he caught hold of her and said, "Come to bed with me, sister." She replied, "No, brother. Do not force me. This is no way to behave in Israel. Do not do anything so disgraceful. Wherever should I go? I should be marked with this shame, while you would become disgraced in Israel. Why not go and speak to the king? He will not refuse to give me to you." But he would not listen to her. He overpowered her and raped her. Amnon was then seized with extreme hatred for her. The hatred he now felt for her was greater than his earlier love. "Get up and go," he said. She said, "No, brother. To send me away would be worse than the other wrong you have done me." But he would not listen to her. He called his personal servant. "Rid me of this woman," he said. "Throw her out and bolt the door behind her." She was wearing a magnificent dress, for this was what the king's unmarried daughters wore in days gone by. So the servant put her out and bolted the door behind her. Tamar put dust on her head, tore the magnificent dress which she was wearing, laid her hand on her head, and went away, crying aloud as she went. Her brother Absalom said to her, "Has Amnon your brother been with you?" "Sister, be quiet. He is your brother. Do not take the matter to heart." Tamar, however, went back to her brother Absalom's house inconsolable. When King David heard the whole story, he was very angry, but he had no wish to harm his son Amnon, whom he loved because he was his firstborn. Absalom, however, would not so much as speak to Amnon, since he hated Amnon for having raped his sister Tamar. 2 years later, when Absalom had the sheep shearers at Baal-Hazor, which is near Ephraim, he invited all the king's sons. Absalom went to the king and said, "Now, sir, your servant has the sheep shearers. Will the king and his retinue be pleased to come with your servant?" "No, my son," the king replied. "We must not all come and be a burden to you." And though Absalom was insistent, he would not go but dismissed him. Absalom persisted, "Then at least let my brother Amnon come with us." The king said, "Why should he go with you?" On Absalom's insistence, however, he let Amnon and all the king's sons to go with him. Absalom prepared a royal banquet and then gave this order to the servants, "Listen carefully. When Amnon's heart is merry with wine and I say, 'Strike Amnon down,' then kill him. Don't be afraid. Have I not myself given you the order? Use your strength and show your mettle." Absalom's servants treated Amnon as Absalom had ordered. The king's sons all leapt to their feet, mounted their mules and fled. While they were on the road, word reached David, "Absalom has killed all the king's sons. Not one of them is left." The king stood up, tore his clothes and threw himself on the ground. All his officers tore their clothes too. Jonadab son of Shimea, David's brother, then spoke up and said, "Do not let my lord take to heart the report that all the young men, the king's sons, have been killed, since only Amnon is dead. For Absalom has been promising himself to do this since the day when Amnon raped his sister Tamar. So my lord the king must not imagine that all the king's sons are dead. Only Amnon is dead and Absalom has fled." The man on sentry duty looked up and saw a large troop coming along the road from Bahurim. The sentry came to tell the king, "I have seen some people coming down the Bahurim road on the mountainside." Jonadab then said to the king, "These are the king's sons arriving. What your servant said is exactly what happened." He had scarcely finished speaking when the king's sons arrived and wept aloud. The king and all his retinue wept aloud too. Absalom had gone to Talmai son of Ammihud, king of Geshur. The king mourned for his son every day. When Absalom had gone to Geshur, he stayed there for 3 years. Once the king was consoled over Amnon's death, his anger against Absalom subsided. 2 Samuel, chapter 14. Now, Joab son of Zeruiah observed that the king was favorably inclined to Absalom. Joab therefore sent to Tekoa for a wise woman. "Pretend to be in mourning," he said. "Dress yourself in mourning, do not perfume yourself. Act like a woman who has long been mourning for the dead. Then go to the king and say this to him." And Joab put the words into her mouth which she was to say. So the woman of Tekoa went to the king and, falling on her face to the ground, prostrated herself. "Help, my lord king," she said. The king said, "What is the matter?" "As you see," she replied, "I am a widow. My husband is dead. Your servant had 2 sons, and out in the fields, where there was no one to intervene, they had a quarrel. And one of them struck the other one and killed him. And now the whole clan has risen against your servant. Give up the man who killed his brother," they say, "so that we can put him to death, to atone for the life of the brother whom he has murdered, and thus we shall destroy the heir as well. By this means they will extinguish the ember still left to me, leaving my husband neither name nor survivor on the face of the earth." Then the king said to the woman, "Go home. I myself shall give orders about your case." The woman of Tekoa said to the king, "My lord king, may the guilt be on me and on my family. The king and his throne are innocent of it. Bring me the man who threatened you," the king replied, "and he shall never hurt you again." She then said, "Let the king be pleased to pronounce the name of Yahweh your God, so that the avenger of blood may not do greater harm and destroy my son. As Yahweh lives," he said, "not one of your son's hairs shall fall to the ground." Then the woman said, "Permit your servant to say something else to my lord the king." "Go on," he said. The woman said, "Why then has the king, who by giving this verdict has condemned himself, conceived the idea, against God's people's interests, of not bringing home the son whom he has banished? We are all mortal. We are like water spilt on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again, nor does God raise up a corpse. Let the king therefore make plans for his banished son not to remain far away from him in exile. Now, the reason why I came to speak about this to my lord the king is that I was being intimidated, and your servant thought, I shall speak to the king. Perhaps the king will do what his servant asks. Surely the king will consent to save his servant from the clutches of the man who is trying to cut both me and my son off from God's heritage. Let a word from my lord the king. Restore the peace." Your servant thought, "For my lord the king is like the angel of God in understanding good and evil. May Yahweh your God be with you." Replying to the woman, the king said, "Now do not evade the question which I am going to ask you." The woman said, "Let my lord the king ask his question. Is not Joab's hand behind you in all this?" The king asked. The woman replied, "As you live, my lord king, I cannot escape what my lord the king says, either to right or to left. Yes, it was your servant Joab who gave me my orders. He put all these words into your servant's mouth. Your servant Joab did this to approach the matter indirectly, but my lord has the wisdom of the angel of God. He knows everything that happens on earth." The king then said to Joab, "Very well, the suit is granted. Go and bring the young man Absalom back." Joab fell on his face to the ground, prostrated himself and blessed the king. "My lord king," Joab said, "today your servant knows that he has won your favor, since the king has done what his servant asked." Joab then set off, went to Geshur, and brought Absalom back to Jerusalem. The king, however, said, "Let him retire to his own house. He is not to appear in my presence." So Absalom retired to his own house and was not received by the king. In all Israel there was no one more praised for his beauty than Absalom. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, he could not be faulted. When he cut his hair, he shaved it once a year because his hair got too heavy. He would weigh the hair, 200 shekels, king's weight. To Absalom were born 3 sons and 1 daughter called Tamar. She was a beautiful woman. Absalom lived in Jerusalem for 2 years without being received by the king. Absalom then summoned Joab, intending to send him to the king, but Joab would not come to him. He sent for him a second time, but still he would not come. At this, Absalom said to his retainers, "Look, Joab's field is next to mine and he has barley in it. Go and set it on fire." Absalom's retainers set fire to the field. Joab then stirred himself, went to Absalom in his house and asked, "Why have your retainers set my field on fire?" Absalom replied to Joab, "Look, I sent word to you. Come here, so that I can send you to the king to say, 'Why come back from Geshur? Better for me to have been there still. Now I want to be received by the king, and if I am guilty, let him put me to death.'" Joab went to the king and told him this. He then summoned Absalom, who prostrated himself with his face to the ground before the king. And the king kissed Absalom. 2 Samuel, chapter 15. After this, Absalom procured a chariot and horses, with 50 men to run ahead of him. He would get up early and stand beside the road leading to the city gate, and whenever a man with some lawsuit had to come before the king's tribunal, Absalom would call out to him and ask, "Which town are you from?" If he answered, "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel," then Absalom would say, "Look, your case is sound and just, but not one of the king's deputies will listen to you." Absalom would say, "Oh, who will appoint me judge in the land?" Then anyone with a lawsuit or a plea could come to me, and I should see he had justice. And whenever anyone came up to him to prostrate himself, he would stretch out his hand, draw him to him and kiss him. Absalom acted like this with every Israelite who appealed to the king's tribunal, and so Absalom won the Israelites' hearts. When 4 years had gone by, Absalom said to the king, "Allow me to go to Hebron and fulfill the vow which I have made to Yahweh. For when I was in Geshur in Aram, your servant made this vow, 'If Yahweh brings me back to Jerusalem, I shall pay my devotions to Yahweh in Hebron.'" The king said to him, "Go in peace." So he set off and went to Hebron. Absalom sent couriers throughout the tribes of Israel to say, "When you hear the trumpet sound, you are to say, 'Absalom is king at Hebron.'" With Absalom went 200 men from Jerusalem. They had been invited and had gone in all innocence, unaware of what was going on. Absalom sent for Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor, from Gilo his town, and had him with him while offering the sacrifices. The conspiracy grew in strength, since Absalom's supporters grew in number. A messenger came and told David, "The men of Israel have shifted their allegiance to Absalom." David said to all his retinue then with him in Jerusalem, "Up, let us flee, or we shall not escape from Absalom. Leave as quickly as you can, in case he mounts a sudden attack, overcomes us and puts the city to the sword." The king's retinue replied, "Whatever my lord the king decides, we are at your service." The king set out on foot with his whole household, leaving 10 concubines to look after the palace. The king set out on foot with everyone following, and they halted at the last house. All his officers stood at his side. All the Cherethites and all the Pelethites, with Ittai and all the 600 Gittites who had come in his retinue from Gath, marched past the king. The king said to Ittai the Gittite, "You, why are you coming with us? Go back and stay with the king, for you are a foreigner, indeed an exile from your homeland. You arrived only yesterday. Should I take you wandering with us today, when I do not know myself where I am going? Go back, take your fellow countrymen with you, and may Yahweh show you mercy and faithful love." Ittai replied to the king, "As Yahweh lives, and as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king may be, for death or life, your servant will be there too." David then said to Ittai, "Go ahead, march past." And Ittai of Gath marched past with all his men and with all his children too. The entire population was weeping aloud as the king stood in the bed of the Kidron, and everyone marched past him, making for the desert. Zadok was there too, and all the Levites with him, carrying the ark of God. They set the ark of God down beside Abiathar until everyone had finished marching out of the town. The king then said to Zadok, "Take the ark of God back into the city. Should I win Yahweh's favor, he will bring me back and allow me to see it and its tent once more." But should he say, "You displease me, here I am," let him treat me as he sees fit. The king said to Zadok the priest, "Look, you and Abiathar go back quietly into the city, with your 2 sons, your own son Ahimaaz and Jonathan son of Abiathar. You see, I shall wait in the passes of the desert plain until word comes from you bringing me news." So Zadok and Abiathar took the ark of God back to Jerusalem and stayed there. David then made his way up the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went, his head covered and his feet bare. And all the people with him had their heads covered and made their way up, weeping as they went. David was then informed that Ahithophel was among the conspirators with Absalom. David said, "I beg you, Yahweh, turn Ahithophel's advice to folly." As David reached the summit, where God is worshipped, he saw Hushai the Archite, his friend, coming to meet him with his tunic torn and with earth on his head. David said, "If you go along with me, you will be a burden to me. But if you go back to the city and say to Absalom, 'I am at your service, my lord king. Once I was in your father's service, but now I shall serve you,' you will be able to thwart Ahithophel's advice for me. Surely the priests Zadok and Abiathar will be with you? Anything you hear from the palace you must report to the priests Zadok and Abiathar. You see, their 2 sons are there with them, Zadok's son Ahimaaz and Abiathar's son Jonathan. Through these you will send me word of everything you hear." Hushai, David's friend, entered the city just as Absalom was reaching Jerusalem. 2 Samuel, chapter 16. When David had passed a little beyond the summit, Meribal's retainer, Ziba, met him with a pair of donkeys, saddled and laden with 200 loaves of bread, 100 bunches of raisins, 100 of the season's fruits, and a skin of wine. The king said to Ziba, "What are you going to do with that?" "The donkeys," Ziba replied, "are for the king's family to ride, the bread and the fruit for the soldiers to eat. The wine is for drinking by those who get exhausted in the desert." The king asked, "And where is your master's son?" Ziba replied to the king, "Why, he has stayed in Jerusalem because he says, 'Today, the house of Israel will give me back my father's kingdom.'" Then the king said to Ziba, "Everything owned by Meribal is yours." Ziba said, "I prostrate myself. May I be worthy of your favor, my lord king." As David was reaching Bahurim, out came a man of the same clan as Saul's family. His name was Shimei son of Gera, and, as he came, he uttered curse after curse and threw stones at David and at all King David's retinue, even though the whole army and all the champions formed an escort round the king on either side. The words of his curse were these, off with you, man of blood, scoundrel. Yahweh has paid you back for all the spilt blood of the house of Saul, whose sovereignty you have usurped, and Yahweh has transferred the sovereign power to Absalom your son. Now your wickedness has overtaken you, man of blood that you are." Abishai son of Zeruiah said to the king, "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and cut his head off." But the king replied, "What concern is my business to you, sons of Zeruiah? Let him curse. If Yahweh has said to him, 'Curse David,' what right has anyone to say, 'Why have you done so?'" David said to Abishai and all his retinue, "Why, the son sprung from my own body is now seeking my life. All the more reason for this Benjaminite to do so. Let him curse on, if Yahweh has told him to. Perhaps Yahweh will look on my wretchedness and will repay me with good for his curses today." So David and his men went on their way, and Shimei kept pace with him along the opposite mountainside, cursing as he went, throwing stones and flinging dust. The king and all the people who were with him arrived exhausted and there they drew breath. Absalom entered Jerusalem with all the men of Israel. With him was Ahithophel. When Hushai the Archite, David's friend, reached Absalom, Hushai said to Absalom, "Long live the king! Long live the king!" Absalom said to Hushai, "Is this your faithful love for your friend? Why didn't you go away with your friend?" Hushai replied to Absalom, No, the man whom Yahweh and this people and all the men of Israel have chosen. He is the man for me, and with him will I stay. Besides, whom should I serve if not his son? As I served your father, so shall I serve you. Absalom said to Ahithophel, Think carefully. What shall we do? Ahithophel replied to Absalom, Go to your father's concubines whom he left to look after the palace. Then all Israel will hear that you have thoroughly antagonized your father, and the resolution of all your supporters will be strengthened. So a tent was pitched for Absalom on the flat roof, and, with all Israel watching, Absalom went to his father's concubines. At the time, whatever advice Ahithophel gave was treated like a decision obtained from God. As by David, so by Absalom, was all Ahithophel's advice regarded. 2 Samuel, chapter 17. Ahithophel said to Absalom, Let me choose 12,000 men and set off this very night in pursuit of David. I shall fall on him while he is tired and dispirited. I shall strike terror into him, and all the people who are with him will run away. I shall kill only the king, and I shall then bring all the people back to you, like a bride returning to her husband. You seek the life of one individual only. The people as a whole will have peace. The suggestion seemed a good one to Absalom and all the elders of Israel. Then Absalom said, Now call Hushai the Archite, for us to hear what he too has to say. When Hushai had come to Absalom, Absalom said, This is what Ahithophel says. Are we to do as he suggests? If not, suggest something yourself. Hushai said to Absalom, On this occasion the advice given by Ahithophel is not good. You know, Hushai went on, that your father and his men are great fighters, and that they are now as angry as a wild bear robbed of her cubs. Your father is a man of war. He will not let the army rest during the night. At this moment he is concealed in some hollow or other place. If at the outset there are casualties among our troops, word will go round that the army supporting Absalom has met with disaster, and then even the valiant, the truly lion-hearted, will be demoralized. For all Israel knows that your father is a champion and that the men with him are valiant. For my part, I offer this advice. Summon all Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, to rally to you, as numerous as the sand on the seashore, and you take the field in person with them. We shall reach him wherever he is to be found. We shall fall on him as the dew falls on the ground, and not leave him or any one of the men with him. Should he retire into a town, all Israel will bring ropes to that town, and we shall drag it into the river bed until not a pebble of it is to be found. Then Absalom and all the people of Israel said, Hushai the Archite's advice is better than Ahithophel's. Yahweh having resolved to thwart Ahithophel's shrewd advice and so bring disaster on Absalom. Hushai then told the priests Zadok and Abiathar, Ahithophel gave such and such advice to Absalom and the elders of Israel, but I advised so and so. Send with all speed to David and say, Do not camp in the desert passes tonight, but get through them as fast as you can, or the king and his whole army may be annihilated. Jonathan and Ahimaaz were posted at the fuller's spring. A servant girl was to go and warn them, and they in turn were to warn King David, since they could not give themselves away by coming into the city themselves. A young man saw them nonetheless and told Absalom. The pair of them, however, made off quickly, reaching the house of a man in Bahurim. In his courtyard was a storage well, and they got down into it. The woman took a piece of canvas and, spreading it over the mouth of the storage well, scattered crushed grain on it so that nothing showed. When Absalom's servants reached the woman at the house, they said, Where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan? The woman said, They have gone further on, towards the water. They searched but, having found nothing, went back to Jerusalem. When they had gone, the men climbed out of the storage well and went to warn King David. Set out, they told David. Cross the water quickly, for Ahithophel has given such and such advice against you. So David and all the troops with him set off and crossed the Jordan. By dawn no one was left. All had crossed the Jordan. When Ahithophel saw that his advice had not been followed, he saddled his donkey and set off and went home to his own town. Then, having set his house in order, he hanged himself. He was buried in his father's tomb. David had reached Mahanaim by the time that Absalom crossed the Jordan with all the men of Israel. Absalom had put Amasa in command of the army in place of Joab. This Amasa was the son of a man called Ithra the Ishmaelite, who had married Abigail, daughter of Jesse and sister of Zeruiah, mother of Joab. Israel and Absalom pitched their camp in the territory of Gilead. When David reached Mahanaim, Shobi son of Naash from Rabbah of the Ammonites, Machir son of Amiel from Lo-debar, and Barzillai the Gileadite from Rogelim brought bedding, rugs, bowls and crockery, and wheat, barley, meal, roasted grain, beans, lentils, honey, curds and cow's cheese and sheep's cheese, which they presented to David and the people with him for them to eat. The army, they said, must have been hungry, tired, and thirsty in the desert. 2 Samuel, chapter 18. David reviewed the troops who were with him and appointed commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds to lead them. David divided the army into 3 groups, one under the command of Joab, another under the command of Abishai son of Zeruiah and brother of Joab, and the third under the command of Ittai the Gittite. David then said to the troops, "I shall take the field in person with you." But the troops replied, "You are not to take the field. No one will bother about us if we run away. They will not even bother about us if half of us are killed. But you are 10,000 times more valuable. So it is better if you stay inside the town, in case we need reinforcements." David said, "I will do what you think best." And the king stood beside the gate as the troops marched out by their hundreds and their thousands. The king gave orders to Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, "For my sake, treat young Absalom gently." And the troops all heard the king give all the commanders these orders about Absalom. So the troops marched out into the open to engage Israel, and the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. There, the army of Israel was beaten by David's retainers. It was a great defeat that day, with 20,000 casualties. The fighting spread throughout the region, and that day the forest claimed more victims than the sword. Absalom happened to run into some of David's guards. Absalom was riding his mule, and the mule passed under the thick branches of a great oak. Absalom's head got caught in the oak, and he was left hanging between heaven and earth, while the mule he was riding went on. Someone saw this and reported to Joab, "I have just seen Absalom hanging from an oak." Joab said to the man who had informed him, "If you saw him, why did you not strike him to the ground then and there? I would have made it my business to give you 10 silver shekels and a belt." The man replied to Joab, "Even if I could feel the weight of 1,000 silver shekels in my hand, I would not lift my hand against the king's son. In our own hearing, the king gave you and Abishai and Ittai these orders. For my sake, spare young Absalom. Even if I had deceived myself, nothing stays hidden from the king, and you would have dissociated yourself from me." Joab then said, "I cannot waste time arguing with you." And, taking 3 darts in his hand, he planted them in Absalom's heart, while he was still alive, deep in the oak tree. 10 soldiers, Joab's armor-bearers, then came in close, struck Absalom and killed him. Joab then had the trumpet sounded, and the troops left off pursuing Israel, since Joab held the troops back. They took Absalom, flung him into a deep pit in the forest, and raised a huge cairn over him. All the Israelites had fled, dispersing to their homes. Now, during his lifetime, Absalom had made and erected a pillar to himself, which is in the valley of the king. "I have no son," he said, "to preserve the memory of my name." He gave his own name to the pillar, and today it is still called Absalom's monument. Ahimaaz son of Zadok said, "Let me run and tell the king the good news that Yahweh has vindicated his cause by ridding him of his enemies." But Joab said, "Today you would be no bearer of good news. Some other day you may be. But today you would not be bringing good news, since the king's son is dead." Joab then said to the Cushite, "Go and tell the king what you have seen." The Cushite prostrated himself to Joab and ran off. But Ahimaaz son of Zadok persisted. "Come what may," he said to Joab, "please let me run after the Cushite." "My son," Joab said, "why run? You will get no reward for your news." But he replied, "Come what may, let me run." And Joab said, "Run then." So Ahimaaz ran off along the road through the plain, outrunning the Cushite. David was sitting between the two gates. The sentry, having gone up to the roof of the gate, looked out from the ramparts and saw a man running alone. The sentry called down to the king and told him. The king said, "If he is alone, he is bringing good news." As the man drew steadily nearer, the lookout man saw another man running, and the sentry above the gate shouted, "Here comes another man, running alone." David said, "He too is a bearer of good news." The sentry said, "I recognize the way the first man runs. Ahimaaz son of Zadok runs like that." "He is a good man," said the king, "and comes with good news." Ahimaaz went up to the king. "All hail," he said, prostrating himself on the ground before the king. "Blessed be Yahweh your God," he said, "who has handed over the men who rebelled against my lord the king." "Is all well with young Absalom?" the king asked. Ahimaaz replied, "I saw a great commotion when Joab, the king's servant, sent your servant off, but I do not know what it was." The king said, "Go and stand over there." He stood to one side and waited. Then the Cushite arrived. "Good news for my lord the king," the Cushite shouted. "Today Yahweh has vindicated your cause, by ridding you of all who had risen up against you. Is all well with young Absalom?" The king asked the Cushite. "May the enemies of my lord the king," the Cushite answered, "and all who rise up to harm you, share the fate of that young man." 2 Samuel, chapter 19. The king shuddered. He went up to the room over the gate and burst into tears, and as he wept, he kept saying, "Oh, my son Absalom! My son Absalom! If only I had died instead of you! Oh, Absalom, my son, my son!" Word was brought to Joab, "The king is weeping and mourning for Absalom." And for the entire army that day, victory was turned to mourning, the troops having learnt that the king was grieving for his son. And that day the troops came furtively back into town, like troops creeping shamefacedly away when deserting in battle. The king had covered his face and kept crying aloud, "My son Absalom! Oh, Absalom, my son, my son!" Joab went inside to the king and said, "Today you have made all your servants feel ashamed today, when they have saved your life, the lives of your sons and daughters, the lives of your wives and the lives of your concubines. Because you love those who hate you and hate those who love you. Today you have made it plain that commanders and soldiers mean nothing to you. For today I can see that you would be content if we were all dead, provided that Absalom was alive. Now get up, come out and reassure your soldiers. For if you do not come out, I swear by Yahweh, not one man will stay with you tonight. And this will be a worse misfortune for you than anything that has happened to you from your youth until now." The king got up and took his seat at the gate. An announcement was made to the whole army. "The king is sitting at the gate." And the whole army assembled in front of the king. Israel had fled, dispersing to their homes. Throughout the tribes of Israel all was dissension, and people began saying, "The king, having freed us from the clutches of our enemies, having saved us from the clutches of the Philistines, has himself had to flee the country to escape from Absalom. And now Absalom, whom we had anointed to reign over us, has died in battle. Why does no one suggest that the king should be brought back?" What was being said throughout Israel reached the king. King David then sent word to the priests Zadok and Abiathar, "Say to the elders of Judah, why should you be the last to bring the king home? You are my brothers, you are my own flesh and bone. Why should you be the last to bring the king back? And say to Amasa, are you not my own flesh and bone? May God bring unnameable ills on me and worse ills, too, if you do not become my permanent army commander instead of Joab." Thus he rallied the hearts of the men of Judah to a man, and, as a result, they sent word to the king, "Come back, you and all who serve you." So the king started home and reached the Jordan. Judah, coming to meet the king to escort him across the Jordan, had arrived at Gilgal. Shimei son of Gera, the Benjaminite of Bahurim, hurried down with the men of Judah to meet King David. With him were 1,000 men from Benjamin. Ziba, servant of the house of Saul, with his 15 sons and 20 servants, arrived at the Jordan before the king and worked manfully ferrying the king's family across and doing whatever he required. While the king was crossing the Jordan, Shimei son of Gera fell at the king's feet and said to the king, "I hope my lord does not regard me as guilty of a crime. Forget about the wrong your servant did on the day my lord the king left Jerusalem. Let my lord not hold my guilt against me. For your servant is aware of having sinned, and that is why I have come today, the first member of the whole house of Joseph, to come down to meet my lord the king." At this, Abishai son of Zeruiah spoke up and said, "Does Shimei not deserve death for having cursed Yahweh's anointed?" To which David replied, "What concern is my business to you, sons of Zeruiah, that you should oppose my wishes today? Could anyone be put to death in Israel today? Today I know for sure that I am king of Israel." "Your life is spared," the king said. And the king gave him his oath. Meribel son of Saul also went down to meet the king. He had not cared for his feet or hands. He had not trimmed his mustache or washed his clothes from the day of the king's departure till the day of his peaceful return. When he arrived from Jerusalem to greet the king asked him, "Why did you not come with me, Meribel?" "My lord king," he replied, "my retainer deceived me. Your servant said to him, 'Saddle the donkey for me to ride, so that I can go with the king, your servant being lame. He has slandered your servant to my lord the king. My lord the king, however, is like the angel of God, so do as you think right. My father's entire family deserved no better than death for my lord the king, and yet you admitted your servant to the ranks of those who eat at your table. What right have I to make any further appeal to the king?' The king said, 'You need say no more. I rule that you and Ziba divide the property between you.' 'Let him take it all,' Meribel said to the king, 'since my lord the king has come back home in peace.' Barzillai the Gileadite had come down from Rogelim and accompanied the king towards the Jordan, intending to take leave of him at the Jordan. Barzillai was a man of great age. He was 80 years old. He had kept the king in provisions during his stay at Mahanaim, being a very wealthy man. 'Come with me,' the king said to Barzillai, 'and I will provide for you at my side in Jerusalem.' Barzillai replied to the king, 'How many years have I left to live, for me to go up to Jerusalem with the king? I am now 80 years old. Can I tell the good from the bad? Has your servant any taste for his food and drink? Can I still hear the voices of men and women singers? Why should your servant be a further burden to my lord the king? Your servant will go a little way across the Jordan with the king, but why should the king reward me so generously for that? Please allow your servant to go home again, so that I can die in my own town near the grave of my father and mother. But here is your servant Chimham. Let him go with my lord the king. Treat him as you think right.' The king said, 'Let Chimham come along with me then. I shall do whatever you wish for him, and anything you request I shall do for your sake.' The people then all crossed the Jordan, and the king, having crossed, kissed Barzillai and blessed him, and the latter went home. The king went on to Gilgal, and Chimham went with him. All the people of Judah accompanied the king, and also half the people of Israel. All the men of Israel then came to the king. 'Why,' they asked the king, 'have our brothers, the men of Judah, carried you off and brought the king and his family across the Jordan, and all David's men with him?' All the men of Judah retorted to the men of Israel, 'Because the king is more closely related to us. Why do you take offense at this? Have we been eating at the king's expense? Have we taken any position for ourselves? The men of Israel replied to the men of Judah, "We have 10 shares in the king, and, what is more, we are your elder brothers, so why have you slighted us? Were we not the first to suggest bringing back our king?" The men of Judah's words were even more intemperate than those of the men of Israel. 2 Samuel, chapter 20. Now there happened to be a scoundrel there called Sheba son of Bichri, a Benjaminite, who sounded the trumpet and shouted, "We have no share in David, we have no heritage in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tents, O Israel!" At this all the men of Israel deserted David and followed Sheba son of Bichri. But the men of Judah stuck close to their king, from the Jordan all the way to Jerusalem. David returned to his palace in Jerusalem. The king took the 10 concubines, whom he had left to look after the palace, and put them under guard. He provided for their upkeep but never went near them again. They were shut away until the day they died, widows, as it were, of a living man. The king said to Amasa, "Summon me the men of Judah and be here yourself within 3 days." Amasa went off to summon Judah, but he took longer than the time fixed by David. David then said to Abishai, "Sheba son of Bichri is now in a position to do us more damage even than Absalom. Take your master's retainers and be after him, before he can reach any fortified towns and elude us." Joab, the Cherethites, the Pelethites, and all the champions took the field under Abishai, setting off from Jerusalem in pursuit of Sheba son of Bichri. They were near the great stone at Gibeon when Amasa met them, coming the other way. Joab was wearing his uniform, over which he had buckled on a sword hanging from his waist in its scabbard. The sword came out and fell. Joab said to Amasa, "Are you well, brother?" And with his right hand, took Amasa by the beard to kiss him. Amasa paid no attention to the sword, which Joab had now picked up, and Joab struck him with it in the belly, spilling his entrails all over the ground. He did not need to strike a second blow, and Amasa died, while Joab and Abishai hurried on in pursuit of Sheba son of Bichri. One of Joab's men stood on guard beside Amasa, shouting, "Whoever is on Joab's side, whoever is for David, follow Joab." Amasa meanwhile lay wallowing in his blood in the middle of the road. Seeing that everyone was stopping, the man dragged Amasa off the road into the field and threw a cloak over him, having realized that everyone passing would stop. Once Amasa had been taken off the road, the men all carried on, following Joab in pursuit of Sheba son of Bichri. Sheba crossed all the tribes of Israel as far as Abel-Beth-Maachah, and the Bichrites Og. They formed up and followed him. Laying siege to him in Abel-Beth-Maachah, they threw up a ramp against the outer wall of the town, while the whole army accompanying Joab undermined the wall to bring it down. A quick-witted woman shouted from the town, "Listen, listen! Say to Joab, 'Come here, I want to speak to you.'" He came forward, and the woman said, "Are you Joab?" "I am," he replied. She said, "Listen to what your servant says." "I am listening," he replied. She then spoke as follows, "In olden days people used to say, 'Abel and Dan are where you should inquire whether a tradition established by the faithful of Israel has finally died out. And yet you are trying to destroy a town, a metropolis of Israel. Why do you want to devour Yahweh's heritage?" "The last thing I want to do," said Joab, "is either to devour or to destroy. This is not the issue. A man from the highlands of Ephraim, called Sheba son of Bichri, has revolted against the king, against David. Hand that one man over, and I will raise the siege of the town." "Very well," the woman said to Joab. "His head will be thrown over the wall to you." The woman went and spoke to all the people as her wisdom dictated. They cut off the head of Sheba son of Bichri and threw it down to Joab. He had the trumpet sounded, and they withdrew from the town and all went home, while Joab himself went back to the king in Jerusalem. Joab commanded the whole army. Benaiah son of Jehoiada commanded the Cherethites and Pelethites. Aduram was in charge of forced labor. Jehoshaphat son of Ahilud was herald. Shea was secretary. Zadok and Abiathar were priests. Also, Ira the Jairite was David's priest. 2 Samuel, chapter 21. In the days of David there was a famine which lasted for 3 years on end. David consulted Yahweh, and Yahweh said, Saul and his family have incurred blood guilt by putting the Gibeonites to death. Then the king summoned the Gibeonites and said, Now, the Gibeonites were not Israelites, but were a remnant of the Amorites, to whom the Israelites had bound themselves by oath. Saul, however, in his zeal for the Israelites and for Judah, had done his best to exterminate them. Hence David said to the Gibeonites, What can I do for you? How can I make amends, so that you will call a blessing down on Yahweh's heritage? The Gibeonites replied, Our quarrel with Saul and his family cannot be settled for silver or gold, nor by putting to death one man in Israel. David said, Say what you want and I will do it for you. Then they replied to the king, The man who dismembered us and planned to annihilate us, so that we should not exist anywhere in Israelite territory, we want 7 of his descendants handed over to us. And we shall dismember them before Yahweh at Gibeon on Yahweh's hill. I shall hand them over, said the king. The king, however, spared Meribel son of Jonathan, son of Saul, on account of the oath by Yahweh binding them together, binding David and Jonathan son of Saul. The king took the 2 sons born to Saul by Rizpah daughter of Aiah, Armani and Meribel, and the 5 sons born by Merab daughter of Saul to Adriel son of Barzillai, of Meholah. He handed these over to the Gibeonites who dismembered them before Yahweh on the hill. The 7 of them perished together. They were put to death in the first days of the harvest, at the beginning of the barley harvest. Rizpah daughter of Aiah, wearing sacking and spreading some out for herself on the rock, from the beginning of the barley harvest until the rain fell on them from heaven, kept the birds of the sky away from them in the daytime, and the wild animals away at night. David was told of what Saul's concubine, Rizpah daughter of Aiah, had done. David went and recovered the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan from the notables of Jabesh in Gilead. The latter had stolen them from the square in Bethshean, where the Philistines had hung them, when the Philistines had defeated Saul at Gilboa. David fetched the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan. The bones of the men who had been dismembered were collected, and these, with the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan, were buried in the territory of Benjamin, at Zelah, in the tomb of Saul's father, Kish. The king's orders were carried out to the letter, and after that, God took pity on the country. Once again the Philistines made war on Israel. David went down with his retainers. They fought the Philistines, and David began to tire. There was a champion, one of the sons of Rapha. His spear weighed 300 shekels of bronze. He was wearing a new sword and was confident of killing David. Abishai son of Zeruiah came to his rescue, however, attacking the Philistine and killing him. Then it was that David's men swore the following oath to him, You are never to go into battle with us again, in case you should extinguish the lamp of Israel. After this, war with the Philistines broke out again at Gob. This was when Sibbecai of Husha killed Saph, one of the sons of Rapha. Again, war with the Philistines broke out at Gob, and Elhanan son of Jair, of Bethlehem, killed Goliath of Gath, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. There was further warfare at Gath, where there was a man of huge stature with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in all. He too was a son of Rapha. When he defied Israel, Jonathan son of Shemaiah, brother of David, cut him down. These 4 were sons of Rapha in Gath, and fell at the hands of David and his retainers. 2 Samuel, chapter 22. David addressed the words of this song to Yahweh, when Yahweh had delivered him from the clutches of all his enemies and from the clutches of Saul. He said, Yahweh is my rock and my fortress. My deliverer is my God. I take refuge in him, my rock, my shield, my saving strength, my stronghold, my place of refuge. My Savior, you have saved me from violence. I call to Yahweh, who is worthy of praise, and I am saved from my foes. With death's breakers closing in on me, Belial's torrents ready to swallow me, Sheol's snares on every side of me, death's traps lying ahead of me, I called to Yahweh in my anguish. I cried for help to my God. From his temple he heard my voice. My cry came to his ears. Then the earth quaked and rocked. The heavens' foundations shuddered. They quaked at his blazing anger. Smoke rose from his nostrils, from his mouth devouring fire. Coals were kindled at it. He parted the heavens and came down, a storm cloud underneath his feet. Riding one of the winged creatures, he flew, soaring on the wings of the wind. He wrapped himself in darkness, his pavilion dark waters and dense cloud. A brightness lit up before him, hail and blazing fire. Yahweh thundered from the heavens. The Most High made his voice heard. He shot his arrows and scattered them. His lightning flashed and routed them. The very springs of ocean were exposed. The world's foundations were laid bare, at the roaring of Yahweh, at the blast of breath from his nostrils. He reached down from on high, snatched me up, pulled me from the watery depths, rescued me from my mighty foe, from my enemies who were stronger than I. They assailed me on my day of disaster, but Yahweh was there to support me. He freed me, set me at large, he rescued me, because he loves me. Yahweh rewards me for my uprightness. As my hands are pure, so he repays me, since I have kept the ways of Yahweh, and not fallen away from my God. His judgments are all before me, his statutes I have not put away from me. I am blameless before him, I keep myself clear of evil. Hence Yahweh repaid me for acting uprightly, because he could see I was pure. Faithful you are to the faithful, blameless with the blameless, sincere to the sincere but cunning to the crafty. You save a people that is humble and humiliate those with haughty looks. Yahweh, you yourself are my lamp, my God lights up my darkness. With you I storm the rampart, with my God I can scale any wall. This God, his way is blameless. The word of Yahweh is refined in the furnace, for he alone is the shield of all who take refuge in him. For who is God but Yahweh, who is a rock but our God? This God who girds me with strength, who makes my way free from blame, who makes me as swift as a deer and sets me firmly on the heights, who trains my hands for battle, my arms to bend a bow of bronze. You give me your invincible shield, you never cease to listen to me. You give me the strides of a giant, give me ankles that never weaken. I pursue my enemies and exterminate them, not turning back till they are annihilated. I strike them down, and they cannot rise, they fall, they are under my feet. You have girded me with strength for the fight, bent down my assailants beneath me, made my enemies retreat before me, and those who hate me I destroy. They cry out, there is no one to save, to Yahweh, but no answer comes. I crumble them like the dust of the squares, trample them like the mud of the streets. You free me from the quarrels of my people. You place me at the head of the nations. A people I did not know are now my servants. Foreigners come wooing my favor. No sooner do they hear than they obey me. Foreigners grow faint of heart. They come trembling out of their fastnesses. Life to Yahweh. Blessed be my rock. Exalted be the God of my salvation, the God who gives me vengeance and crushes the peoples under me, who takes me away from my enemies. You lift me high above those who attack me. You deliver me from the man of violence. For this I will praise you, Yahweh, among the nations, and sing praise to your name. He saves his king, time after time, displays faithful love for his anointed, for David and his heirs forever. Second Samuel, chapter 23. These are the last words of David. Thus speaks David son of Jesse, thus speaks the man raised to eminence, the anointed of the God of Jacob, the singer of the songs of Israel. The Spirit of Yahweh speaks through me, his word is on my tongue. The God of Jacob has spoken, the rock of Israel has said to me. He whose rule is upright on earth, who rules in the fear of God, is like the morning light at sunrise on a cloudless morning, making the grass of the earth sparkle after rain. Yes, my house stands firm with God. He has made an eternal covenant with me, all in order, well assured. Does he not bring to fruition my every victory and desire? But men of Belial he rejects like thorns, for these are never taken up in the hand. No one touches them except with a pitchfork or spear shaft, and then only to burn them to nothing. These are the names of David's champions. Ishbaal the Hakmonite, leader of the three. It was he who brandished his spear over 800 men whom he had killed at one time. Next, there was Eleazar son of Dodo, the Ahohite, one of the three champions. He was with David at Padamim when the Philistines mustered for battle there, and the men of Israel had disbanded. But he stood his ground and cut down the Philistines until his hand was so stiff that he could not let go of the sword. Yahweh brought about a great victory that day, and the people rallied behind him, although only to plunder. Next, there was Shammah son of Elah, the Hararite. The Philistines had mustered at Lehi. There was a field full of lentils there. The people fled from the Philistines, but he took his stand in the middle of the field, held it, and cut down the Philistines. And Yahweh brought about a great victory. 3 members of the 30 went down at the beginning of the harvest and came to David at the cave of Adullam, while a company of Philistines was encamped in the valley of the Rephaim. David was then in the stronghold, and there was a Philistine garrison in Bethlehem. Longingly David said, "If only someone would fetch me a drink of water from the well that stands by the gate at Bethlehem." At this, the 3 champions, forcing their way through the Philistine camp, drew water from the well that stands by the gate of Bethlehem and, taking it away, presented it to David. He, however, would not drink any of it, but poured it out as a libation to Yahweh. "Yahweh preserve me," he said, "from doing such a thing. This is the blood of men who went at risk of their lives." That was why he would not drink. Such were the deeds of these 3 champions. Abishai, brother of Joab and son of Zeruiah, was leader of the 30. It was he who brandished his spear over 300 men whom he had killed, winning himself a name among the 30. He was a most illustrious member of the 30 and became their captain, but he was not equal to the 3. Benaiah of Kabzeel was the son of Jehoiada and hero of many exploits. He it was who slaughtered 2 formidable Moabites and, one snowy day, climbed down and slaughtered the lion in the storage well. He also slaughtered an Egyptian of great stature. The Egyptian was armed with a spear, but he took him on with a staff, tore the spear from the Egyptian's hand and killed the man with it. Such were the exploits of Benaiah son of Jehoiada, winning him a name among the 30 champions. He was a most illustrious member of the 30, but he was not equal to the 3. David put him in command of his bodyguard. Asahel brother of Joab was one of the 30, Elhanan son of Dodo, of Bethlehem, Shammah of Harod, Elachar of Harod, Helaz of Beth-Pelet, Ira son of Ikesh, of Tekoa, Abiezer of Anathoth, Sibbecai of Husha, Zalman of Aho, Maharai of Netopha, Heled son of Banah, of Netopha, Ittai son of Ribai, of Gibeah in Benjamin, Benaiah of Pirathon, Hiddai of the torrents of Gash, Abibaal of Beth-Haarabah, Asmaveth of Bahurim, Eliaber of Shalban, Jashan of Gimzo, Jonathan son of Shammah, of Harar, Ahiam son of Sharar, of Harar, Eliphalet son of Ahasbai, of Beth-Makkah, Eliam son of Ahithophel, of Gilo, Hezro of Carmel, Parai of Arab, Igal son of Nathan, of Zobah, Bani the Gedite, Zelek the Ammonite, Naharai of Beeroth squire to Joab, son of Zeruiah, Ira of Jatter, Gareb of Jatter, Uriah the Hittite, 37 in all. Second Samuel, chapter 24. Again, Yahweh's anger was aroused against Israel, and he incited David against them. "Go," he said, "take a census of Israel and Judah." The king said to Joab and the senior army officers who were with him, "Now, go through all the tribes of Israel from Dan to Beersheba, and take a census of the people. I wish to know the size of the population." Joab said to the king, "May Yahweh your God multiply the people 100 times. however many there are, while my lord the king still has eyes to see it. But why should my lord the king be set on this?" The king nonetheless enforced his order on Joab and the senior officers, and Joab and the senior officers left the king's presence to take a census of the people of Israel. They crossed the Jordan and made a start with Aroer and the town in the middle of the valley, then moved on to the Gadites and to Jazer. They then went to Gilead and the territory of the Hittites, to Kadesh. They then went to Dan, and from Dan cut across to Sidon. They then went to the fortress of Tyre and to all the towns of the Hittites and Canaanites, ending up in the Negeb of Judah at Beersheba. Having traveled throughout the country, after 9 months and 20 days they returned to Jerusalem. Joab gave the king the census results for the people. Israel had 800,000 fighting men who could wield a sword, and Judah 500,000. But afterwards David's heart misgave him for having taken a census of the people. David then said to Yahweh, "I have committed a grave sin by doing this. But now, Yahweh, I beg you to forgive your servant for this fault, for I have acted very foolishly." When, however, David got up next morning, the following message had come from Yahweh to the prophet Gad, David's seer. "Go and say to David, Yahweh says this, I offer you 3 things. Choose which one of them I am to inflict on you." So Gad went to David and said, "Which do you prefer? To have 3 years of famine befall your country, to flee for 3 months before a pursuing army, or to have 3 days of epidemic in your country? Now think, and decide how I am to answer him who sends me." David said to Gad, "I am very apprehensive. Better to fall into Yahweh's hands, since his mercies are great, than to fall into the hands of men." So David chose the epidemic. It was the time of the wheat harvest. So Yahweh unleashed an epidemic on Israel from that morning until the time determined. Plague ravaged the people, and, of the people from Dan to Beersheba, 70,000 died. But when the angel stretched his hand towards Jerusalem to destroy it, Yahweh felt sorry about the calamity and said to the angel who was destroying the people, "Enough now. Hold your hand." The angel of Yahweh was standing by the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. When David saw the angel who was ravaging the people, he said to Yahweh, "I was the one who sinned. I was the one who acted wrongly. But these, the flock, what have they done? Let your hand lie heavy on me and on my family." Gad went to David that day and said, "Go up and raise an altar to Yahweh on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite." So, at Gad's bidding, David went up, as Yahweh had ordered. When Araunah looked up and saw the king and his retinue advancing towards him, Araunah was threshing the wheat. Araunah came forward and prostrated himself on the ground at the king's feet. "Why has my lord the king come to his servant?" Araunah asked. David replied, "To buy the threshing floor from you, to build an altar to Yahweh, so that the plague may be lifted from the people." Araunah said to David, "Let my lord the king take it and make what offerings he thinks fit. Here are the oxen for the burnt offering, the threshing sleds and the oxen's yokes for the wood. My lord the king's servant will give the king everything." And Araunah said to the king, "May Yahweh your God accept what you offer." "No," said the king to Araunah, "I shall give you a price for it. I will not offer Yahweh my God burnt offerings which have cost me nothing." David bought the threshing floor and the oxen for 50 shekels of silver. David built an altar to Yahweh and offered burnt offerings and communion sacrifices. Yahweh then took pity on the country, and the plague was lifted from Israel.